There are guys that are taking drugs, hurting themselves. I see it in their organs. And not to mention, they shut off their own natural production of testosterone, and they feel horrible.
These men destroyed their own bodies with their own hands, and they paid for it in the most horrifying ways imaginable. They injected chemicals so toxic that their blood turned to sludge. Some swallowed compounds so powerful their organs forgot how to function without them. Others drained every drop of water from their own bodies just to get bigger. And when doctors finally cut them open, what they found inside was not human anymore. Organs dissolving, livers crumbling apart at the touch. And honestly, what doctors found inside each of these bodybuilders will completely mess you up. Andreas Munzer. When the surgeons cut Andreas Munzer open on that operating table, they expected to find organs. What they found instead was wreckage. His liver did not look like a liver anymore. It had rotted into a sponge riddled with blood-filled holes that burst open the moment the surgeon's hand pressed against them. Pieces of it literally crumbled away. His kidneys had already shut down. His heart was barely twitching, and his blood had thickened into something dark, slow, and heavy that looked less like blood and more like something you would find clogging a drain. The surgeon performing the operation said he had never in his career seen a human body come apart like this while the person was still technically alive. He said Andreas looked like a corpse that had somehow still been walking around. Andreas Munzer was just 31 years old when this happened, and he was considered the most perfectly conditioned human being who had ever walked onto a bodybuilding stage. Now here is what it actually took to build that body. And I need you to stay with me here because this is where it gets deeply disturbing. Andreas was running approximately 20 different chemical compounds through his body at the exact same time. Not one at a time, not rotating between them, all 20 simultaneously. Some of them were designed to force his muscles to grow beyond anything the human body can produce on its own. Some were designed to strip every single molecule of water from underneath his skin until his skin pressed against his muscle. And some were designed to mask the pain so his brain would not realize his body was falling apart. And he did not do this only before competitions. He stayed in near competition shape every single day of the year, which meant the chemicals never stopped. His body never got one day of rest from the assault. And in the final hours before stepping on stage, he would inject something specifically designed to drain water directly from his blood, his organs, and his cells. The goal was to look as sharp as physically possible under those stage lights. The result was terrifying. Every vein in his body bulged out visibly under his skin, and his skin itself was pulled so tight against his bones that he barely looked human anymore. He did all of that for a trophy. He did all of that for applause. In 1996, he collapsed backstage in Germany, severe pain tearing through his stomach, internal bleeding spreading fast through a body that had nothing left to fight it with. They rushed him to hospital, and what the surgeons found when they opened him up stopped them completely cold. His adrenal glands had shriveled and died. His body had been receiving so many synthetic hormones for so long that it had simply forgotten how to produce its own. His testicles had shrunk to the size of grapes. His liver was hemorrhaging through dozens of cavities that collapsed under the slightest pressure. And here is the part that I cannot get out of my head. He did not die on that table immediately. He survived the night. He was conscious at points. He was reportedly begging the doctors to make the pain stop. He lay there while his liver continued crumbling inside him, and the toxins it could no longer filter poured into his bloodstream and burned their way up to his brain. He was 31 years old and he was dissolving alive. After his death, they searched his belongings and found a journal. Years of daily entries written in his own handwriting. Every compound, every dose, every single day was carefully recorded. He had known exactly what he was doing to himself the entire time. The surgeons said he looked like a corpse that had somehow still been walking around. And somewhere behind him there was a stage and a crowd and a sport that had been cheering for that walking corpse the whole time. Rich Piana. Rich Piana collapsed while he was sitting in a chair getting a haircut. He just went limp, slid sideways out of the chair and hit the floor. And what happened in the minutes after his body hit that floor is the part that the bodybuilding world has never wanted to sit with. His brain was without oxygen for over 30 minutes before medical help arrived. By the time paramedics got there, the man who had looked into a camera for years and told millions of people the raw, ugly truth about this sport was already gone. What they put in that ambulance was a dead body. Rich Piana was 46 years old when he died, and he was the most brutally honest man the sport of bodybuilding had ever produced. Rich had started putting synthetic hormones into his body at 18 years old. By the time he died, he had been doing it every single day for 27 years without stopping. His body had stopped producing its own hormones so long ago it had completely forgotten the process existed. Whatever was moving through his veins was not natural human chemistry anymore. It was engineered in a lab, and in what he himself described as his heaviest period, he was injecting enough synthetic hormone to chemically fuel the bodies of 10 normal men. Not once a day, multiple times a day. His liver processed all of it for 27 years, while it slowly scarred and swelled and hardened to double its natural size. His heart did the same. Both of them growing and thickening and straining to keep up with a body that had been pushed past every boundary nature ever intended. He knew this. His girlfriend confirmed he knew this. And here is what makes it so much darker. In the weeks before he collapsed, his final videos show everything if you know what to look for. His hands trembled slightly all the way through. His breathing audibly labored between sentences. His face was bloated with fluid and his body could no longer drain properly. Millions of people watched those videos. The comments were full of fire emojis and compliments. Nobody said a word, not one person, and neither did he. When paramedics arrived, they found 20 bottles of testosterone in his home. Rich had also battled opiate addiction on top of everything else, so paramedics injected him with a drug that reverses overdoses twice, just to cover every possibility. His heart was restarted. But 30 minutes without oxygen had already done something to his brain that no amount of medical skill was ever going to undo. While Rich lay brain dead in that hospital, a bitter dispute erupted between the women in his life over who had the legal authority to make decisions about his care. His ex-wife on one side, his girlfriend on the other. A man who had spent his entire life being honest about everything ended up as the silent center of a fight nobody talks about while machines kept what remained of him breathing. His family eventually made the call. They pulled the plug. Rich always said whatever it takes. In the end, it took his brain first, then his heart, then everything else. Dallas McCarver. Alexa Adams found Dallas face down in his dinner. He had choked on his food. She was a professional bodybuilder herself. She was the woman who loved him, who had trained beside him every single day, who had watched him build that enormous body one brutal session at a time and knew better than anyone what it had cost him. And now she was standing in their kitchen staring at that same body face down in his food, completely still. No pulse, no response, nothing she could do to pull him back. She dropped to her knees on that kitchen floor and pushed on his chest with everything she had. The emergency operator told her to keep going. She kept going. She kept pushing and screaming his name into a face that could not hear her anymore. It did not matter. Dallas McCarver was already gone, and when the autopsy results came back, they revealed something horrifying. His heart weighed 690 grams. A normal heart weighs around 300 grams. His heart had swollen to more than double its natural size trying to push blood through that enormous body, and doctors found clear evidence of multiple small heart attacks in the weeks before he died. His body had been trying to shut itself down for a long time. He had just kept overriding it every single time. Dallas was running a chemical program so extreme and so expensive that the estimated monthly cost ran into the tens of thousands of dollars, 16 to 18 different compounds tearing through his system simultaneously. His coach, Chad Nichols, had a reputation in the sport for loading athletes with quantities that other professionals described as simply unsurvivable. One other pro reportedly quit working with that same coach after just 3 weeks because his hands had swollen so badly from the compounds that he could no longer shave his own face. Dallas stayed. Dallas kept pushing. Every single day he trained twice, morning and night, feeding a body whose internal hormone levels had been driven to 57 times the natural human ceiling. His organs were not aging the way a 26-year-old's organs age. They were being burned through in months. By the time he died, his heart, kidneys, and his liver looked like they belonged to a 70-year-old man dying of everything at once. In the weeks before the end, Dallas had been experiencing chest pressure so crushing he had to stop mid-set and grip whatever was nearest just to stay upright. He described it to someone close to him as something sitting on his chest that refused to move. He did not go to a doctor. He took more pre-workout and went back under the bar. The morning he died, he had already trained. The meal he choked on was a post-workout bulk meal because the body he was destroying still needed to be fed. His girlfriend performed the Heimlich. It did not work. Some medical professionals who reviewed the case later believe his heart was already giving out at the exact same moment he lost muscular control and inhaled his food, that he was being killed from two directions at once. And the woman who loved him was on her knees on that kitchen floor with her hands on his chest, screaming his name into a face that could no longer hear her. The doctors said that even if he had not choked that night, he had weeks left, maybe less. His body had been sending him the same desperate message for months. He just never once stopped long enough to hear it. Nasser El Sonbaty. In his final months, Nasser El Sonbaty was unrecognizable. This was a man who in 1997 stood on the Mr. Olympia stage and was widely believed by fans and insiders alike to have outperformed every single competitor on that stage. The judges gave it to Dorian Yates anyway. Many people in that arena never got over it, and neither did Nasser. But that body that had come so agonizingly close to the top of the sport had been replaced in his final months by something that looked like a grotesque and swollen nightmare of the man he used to be. His kidneys had stopped working completely. A machine was cleaning his blood for him because his organs had collapsed and given up trying. And because his body had no way to remove the fluid it could no longer process. The fluid built up and swelled him from the inside out. His legs bloated so severely the skin began splitting open like overripe fruit. His face became so distorted that people who had known him for years did not recognize him in photographs. And while all of this was happening, he was secretly online, posting steroid advice to young men under a fake username, telling strangers exactly how to use the same compounds that were actively rotting him from the inside. The smartest man in bodybuilding, giving away the knowledge that was killing him to people who had absolutely no idea who they were really talking to. Nasser El Sonbaty was 47 years old when he died. He spoke 7 languages fluently, held a university degree in history and political science, and was called the Professor because he genuinely deserved the name. His personal steroid diary was discovered years after his death inside the private journals of another professional bodybuilder. When 2 veteran pros sat down and read what Nasser had been consuming at his peak, both of them went visibly quiet. He was taking oral steroids that are known to destroy the liver at a daily dose more than double what either of those men had ever used. And both of them had been deep in the sport for decades. On top of that, he was injecting insulin and growth compounds to force his body to absorb the enormous quantities of food he was consuming across 6 to 7 meals a day. He carried over 330 pounds in the off-season. He also had a serious infection erupt in his shoulder so catastrophic it required surgery, widely believed in the sport to have been caused by injecting an oil directly into the muscle to artificially inflate its size. He denied it. His body told a completely different story. He needed a heart transplant in his final years. He was denied one. His own body had disqualified itself from receiving a replacement because the damage was too extensive and too far gone. He reportedly refused to be hospitalized in his final days. For a man of his intelligence and his pride, dying surrounded by machines and strangers may have felt like the final humiliation he simply could not accept. He died in his sleep in a hotel room in Cairo on March 20th, 2013, during a visit to his family. The sport mourned him for a moment. Then the next season started. The same compounds at the same extremes kept flowing through the next generation, without a single thing changing. Mike Mentzer. Mike Mentzer's heart medication sat on his kitchen counter every single morning for the last years of his life. Full bottle, never opened. His doctor had prescribed it. It was right there within arm's reach every single day. And every single morning Mike Mentzer walked past it and left it there because he no longer trusted the doctors who had given it to him. The same way he no longer trusted the sport that had broken him. The same way he no longer trusted almost anything or anyone left in the world. He died on June 10, 2001. His brother Ray, who had stayed with him because there was nobody else left, died 2 days later in the same apartment. 2 brothers, both destroyed by the same sport, both found in the same rooms they had been slowly dying in together. The medicine was still sitting on that counter when they found Mike. Full bottle. Exactly where he had left it every morning, he chose not to take it. In 1979, Mike did something that had never happened before in the history of bodybuilding and has never happened since. At the Mr. Olympia pre-judging, which is the round where judges score every competitor before the final show, Mike received a perfect 300 points. Every single judge gave him the maximum score possible, not 1 point deducted, not one judge who disagreed, a score that said simply and without any argument that this man was untouchable. At his competitive peak, Mike's weekly chemical load was reported at around 5,000 milligrams of various compounds by people who had actually trained alongside him. He had published modest figures in a bodybuilding magazine. The people who were there said those published numbers had nothing to do with what was really happening, and during the preparation for the 1980 Mr. Olympia, he added something else on top of everything already running through him: a stimulant. The kind that doctors prescribe to people who suffer from extreme sleep disorders, people whose brains cannot stay conscious without medical help. Mike was using it as a daily performance booster during the most psychologically pressurized period of his entire career. That combination of compounds and hard stimulants during those weeks lit something inside his mind that never fully went out. Then 1980 happened. Arnold Schwarzenegger had retired from bodybuilding years earlier, but he came back specifically for that one show, and he won. Mike had been expected to take the title. He had a perfect score from the year before, but the judges gave it to Arnold instead, and never gave a satisfying explanation for why. People who were inside that arena that night called it the most corrupt decision the sport had ever made. Mike called it fixed. He said it publicly. He said it repeatedly. He never stopped saying it. And from that moment, something inside him began tearing apart at the seams. The paranoia swallowed him whole. He became convinced his phone was being listened to. He believed people were following him in the street. He stopped leaving his apartment. He smoked 3 packs of cigarettes every single day. He stopped exercising completely. The man who had built his entire career on logic and science stopped taking care of his own body entirely. At 40 years old, he looked like a ghost wearing the skin of the man who had once stood on that stage with a perfect score. His brother Ray stayed with him through all of it. Ray had his own body that had been destroyed by years of competing, but he stayed because leaving Mike meant leaving him completely alone, and Ray could not bring himself to do that. Mike died on June 10th. Ray died on June 12th, 2 days later, in the same apartment. Nobody found them immediately. 2 brothers who had given everything to the same sport died within 48 hours of each other in a small, quiet apartment, while that sport kept moving forward without even glancing back. Dan Puckett. When the autopsy came back on Dan Puckett, every single organ in his body was in perfect working condition. His heart was healthy, his liver was clean, his kidneys were functioning exactly as they should. There was nothing wrong with him, nothing that should have killed him. Except for one thing the autopsy could not see. The chemicals he had been flooding his body with had reached inside his brain and rewired it so completely and so savagely that by the time the cycle ended and those chemicals drained away, his mind was left in a place so dark and so suffocating that he could not find a single reason to stay inside it. He shot himself. His organs were perfect. His sport killed him anyway. He was 22 when it happened, and everyone who knew him said exactly the same thing about him. Always smiling, always the one laughing in the corner. Now I need to explain something before we go further, because this is the part that most people do not know, and it is the part that makes Dan's story so much more horrifying than it first appears. When you flood your body with the levels of synthetic hormones that competitive bodybuilders use, your body stops producing its own. It shuts that system down completely because the external chemicals are already doing the job. But here is what happens when the cycle ends. When those compounds drain out of your system, your body cannot simply switch itself back on. It has forgotten the process entirely. And in that gap, your hormone levels crash to almost nothing. And what that does to the brain is brutal. Scientists who studied this crash compared it directly to what happens to the brain during cocaine and alcohol withdrawal. The brain stops producing the chemicals that make you feel alive. The chemicals that make you want to get up in the morning. The chemicals that tell you things are going to be okay. All of it just stops. And that's exactly what happened to Dan. He came off his cycle with no medical supervision, no doctor watching his brain chemistry. Nobody had told him this was coming. His family noticed him getting quieter, withdrawing. They thought it was just peer pressure. It wasn't. It was his brain being chemically dismantled while he sat alone in his room trying to understand why the face looking back at him from the mirror felt like a complete stranger. He wrote about it every night in a journal his parents found after he was gone. He wrote about feeling like he was trapped inside someone else's skin with no way out. He wrote about the gym being the only place he had ever felt like himself, and now even that feeling had been ripped away. His parents sat down and read every single word of it after he died. After Dan died, his story spread through bodybuilding forums in whispers, and what came back was devastating. Others posted anonymously about their own crashes after coming off cycles. Some of them had come terrifyingly close to making the same decision he made, and not one of their coaches had warned them this was coming. The people who sold them the compounds took their money and said nothing about what those compounds would do to their minds when they stopped. Greg Kovacs. A cardiologist looked at Greg Kovacs' autopsy report and said his heart looked like it belonged to an 80-year-old obese man who had survived multiple heart attacks. Greg Kovacs was 44 years old. And here is the thing that makes this so much darker than it sounds. That heart had been screaming at him for months before it finally gave out completely. Chest pain so savage they stopped him mid-movement. Feet so swollen and bloated he could barely drag them across the floor. Breathing so labored that walking from one room to another had become an ordeal. His doctors had told him directly and clearly that his heart could not survive what he was demanding of it. Multiple times. He sat in consultation rooms and heard medical professionals tell him he was going to die if he did not stop. And multiple times he stood up and walked out without listening to them. At his peak, Greg weighed 420 pounds and was the single largest professional bodybuilder who had ever lived. Greg consumed 10,000 calories every single day during the off-season, 600 grams of protein, 1,000 grams of carbohydrates, every single day. The kind of quantities that would put a normal person in a hospital bed. The only reason his body could process any of it was because of the compounds he was running that forced his muscles to absorb everything he threw at them. But here is what nobody talks about. His heart was a muscle roughly the size of a fist. Nature designed it to pump blood through a body of around 180 pounds. Greg weighed 420 pounds, which means his heart was doing more than double the work it was ever built to do. Every second, every minute, every hour, every day, for years. That is not dedication. That is a man quietly squeezing the life out of his own heart one beat at a time. And there are rumors that have never been officially confirmed, but have never gone away either. People close to the Canadian bodybuilding scene have said Greg also used something so dangerous it has killed multiple people who tried it. He needed it to burn off the enormous amounts of body fat that came with eating 10,000 calories a day while still trying to look like a competitive bodybuilder on stage. Here is what it does. It was originally created as an industrial pesticide. When a human being takes it, the body starts converting every calorie it has directly into heat. The temperature inside the body keeps rising and rising with no way to stop it until the organs simply cook from the inside out. People have died from it with body temperatures so high they should not have been physically possible in a living human being. At 420 pounds, Greg could not tie his own shoes, could not fit comfortably in a standard vehicle, could not sleep lying flat because his own body weight pressing down on his chest restricted his breathing enough to jolt him awake. He slept semi-reclined every night or risked suffocating under himself. He had traded every basic physical freedom a human being has for the identity of being the largest man on the planet. In November 2013, his heart just stopped. He collapsed at home. Paramedics came. There was nothing left to save. The heart they found when doctors examined him was so enlarged and so ravaged that the cardiologist said he was genuinely amazed it had kept the man alive as long as it had. His wife later confirmed what everyone close to him already knew. Greg had been in agony for months. The chest pains were constant. The swelling was grotesque. The warnings were everywhere. He ignored every single one of them. And the sport that had celebrated his size and his willingness to go further than any human being had gone before never once told him to stop. He wanted to be remembered as the biggest man who ever lived. He got exactly that. He just died before he could see it, before he could read the tributes, before he could hear people say his name. He got the legacy he wanted. He just did not get to be alive for any of it. Franco Columbu. Franco Columbu went into the ocean on a warm California afternoon and never came back out. By the time people on the beach realized something was wrong, he was already under the water. The man who could blow a hot water bottle apart with the raw force of his own lungs. The man who carried a full refrigerator up a flight of stairs on his back. The man who deadlifted over 750 pounds and bench pressed over 500. That man sank silently in the Pacific Ocean on August 30th, 2019 because his heart stopped and there was nobody close enough to reach him before the water pulled him under. He was 78 years old, and he had done everything right. He had been careful, moderate, educated, and disciplined for decades, and none of it was enough to undo what the competitive years had already done to him while he was not looking. Now, here is the part that should make you deeply uncomfortable. People will tell you Franco was one of the careful ones, and compared to others in his era, that is actually true. He did not go to the extremes that killed the others. But do not let that comfort you for even 1 second, because careful in the bodybuilding world of the 1970s still meant putting synthetic hormones into your body that doctors were handing out freely without having any idea what they would do to a person 20 or 30 years down the road. It still meant forcing your heart to pump blood through 185 pounds of dense, heavy muscle day after day after day. And every single one of those days left something behind. Tiny layers of damage pressed into the walls of his arteries, too small to feel, too small to see, but building on each other silently year after year after year, long after Franco had retired and moved on and done everything right. Franco retired. He went back to school and earned a doctorate in chiropractic medicine so he could understand human anatomy at a clinical level and take care of himself better. He stayed active. He swam. He ate well. He listened to his body for 33 years after his last competition. 33 years of doing everything right. The arteries did not care. They had been quietly recording the damage since the 1970s, and they were not going to stop just because Franco had stopped competing. The autopsy revealed heart disease and arterial blockage so severe that his cardiovascular system looked like it belonged to a man 20 to 30 years older than he actually was. His best friend Arnold Schwarzenegger wept publicly. Arnold trained beside Franco for years, did the same things in the same era in the same gyms. Arnold is still alive. Arnold has a pacemaker. Franco is at the bottom of the ocean. Same sport, same era, same everything. One made it out, one did not. Mohammed Benaziza. Mohammed Benaziza was still warm from the stage lights when his body started shutting down. He had just competed. He had just performed. The crowd had applauded. He walked backstage and then he hit the floor and his body started convulsing so violently. Foam poured out of his mouth. Other competitors standing around him, still oiled, still pumped and still in their posing trunks, began screaming for help. And every man in that backstage area knew something in that moment that none of them ever talked about publicly afterward. Every single one of them had used similar compounds that same morning. Every one of them understood as they stood there watching Mohammed shake and foam on that floor that it could have been any one of them lying there instead of him. Paramedics arrived within minutes. It did not matter. At 10:20 in the evening on October 4th, 1992, Mohammed Benaziza was pronounced dead, and the federation whose stage he had just performed on told his grieving family that professional athletes understand the risks. That is the response they gave to a family asking why their son was dead. He knew the risks. That was it. That was everything they had. Mohammed Benaziza was 33 years old when he died. He had dragged himself out of nothing in Algeria, and with no money and no connections, he had cut his way into the highest levels of a sport that had never made room for someone like him. Now, let's take a look at what he used before competition. There is a drug that exists specifically for patients whose hearts are failing. When a damaged heart cannot pump properly and dangerous fluid begins backing up around the organs, doctors inject this compound to force the kidneys to flush that fluid out as fast as possible. It is an emergency medical intervention. Mohammed Benaziza was injecting it into his own bloodstream hours before stepping on stage because it also stripped water from under the skin and made the muscles look sharper under the lights. Rich Gaspari, who competed on those same stages alongside Muhammad, said on record that he himself had used the oral version of this drug exactly once, and the muscle cramps it caused were so savage and so complete that he said he could not even begin to imagine what injecting it directly would feel like. Muhammad was injecting it directly, because the sport rewarded the men who were willing to go further than anyone else. It drained so much water from his body that his blood thickened to something it was never designed to be. The fluid that blood needs to flow freely through the heart and through the vessels was simply gone. His cardiovascular system was trying to push something closer to paste through the chambers of a heart that was already being worked past its limits. He stepped on stage. He performed. The crowd applauded. And the moment it was over, his body presented the full and final bill. His family demanded answers. The federation said their athletes understand the risks. The next season began without a single guideline changed. Muhammad came from nothing. He sacrificed everything. He followed every rule the sport gave him. And the sport that took his life could not even be bothered to change the rules that killed him before the next show started. Aziz Shavershian. The same year Aziz died, his brother was convicted of dealing steroids, and that brother was standing in Thailand with him when it happened. Aziz Shavershian collapsed alone on a wooden bench inside a 90-degree sauna in Bangkok. His heart had been structurally damaged since the day he was born. He had known about it, or had every reason to know about it, and instead of protecting that damaged heart, he had been chemically hammering it without mercy for years. It simply stopped and did not start again. His brother found him on that bench. The boy who had told millions of young men around the world that they were all going to make it, did not make it himself. Before he died, he had become the most influential fitness figure on the internet to an entire generation of young men who desperately wanted to believe they could have exactly what he had. Aziz had one rule for himself. His body would look its absolute best 365 days a year, not just before competitions. Every single day of the year, which meant the compounds flowing through his body never stopped. Not for one day. And his heart, which had that structural defect from birth and had never been properly treated, was under continuous chemical assault every single day from the time he started until the day he died. And in Thailand, in his final weeks, people close to him say he had pushed everything even higher than usual. On top of the bodybuilding compounds, he was using fat-burning stimulants that drove his heart rate up and pushed his body temperature higher. He had been drinking. He had been taking recreational drugs that hit the heart like a wrecking ball. He was severely dehydrated. And then he walked into a 90-degree sauna. Just think about what was happening inside that body in that moment. Every compound in his system was pushing his heart rate higher. His blood pressure was climbing. His body temperature was already rising before he even stepped inside that sauna. And then the sauna heat hit all of that at once. His heart, which had been broken since birth and beaten for years, had absolutely nothing left. No reserve, no backup. It just stopped. Now here is the part that the bodybuilding world has never wanted to talk about openly. Said Shavershian, Aziz's own brother, was convicted of drug supply charges in Sydney in 2011, the same year Aziz died. Saeed was there in Thailand during that trip. The compounds that were running through Aziz's body in those final weeks may have come directly through his own brother's hands. After Aziz died, young men kept following his protocols because he had never once been honest about what those protocols actually were. He had shown the world the body and hidden everything that was producing it. Some of those young men are dead now too. No famous names attached to their stories. No tributes flooding social media. No pages dedicated to their memory. 10 men. 10 different ways to be destroyed by the same sport. Bodybuilding calls itself a sport. But what you just heard is not a sport. It is an industry. And industries do not mourn their dead. They just find the next body to sell.